Hi, I'll pick up where I left off in the last video from the chapter on the brace in Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's Versuch über die wahre Art das Klavier zu spielen. Then there's an appendix to this paragraph which Bach provided for the 1787 edition. In mäßig geschwinden Stücken pflegt man auch zuweilen den prallenden Doppelschlag so auszuführen, wie bei A steht. Diese Ausführung ist gut, wenn wegen der Bassnoten keine Fehler in der Harmonie dadurch entstehen. 1. Diesen Fehler sieht man bei 2. Diese Ausführung der Manier kommt bei halben, 3 und ganzen Kadenzen 4 vor. Indessen ist es etwas Leichtes, statt des Zeichens der Manier, lieber die Ausführung von A auszuschreiben, wenn man sie haben will. So, one can also perform the prallende Doppelschlag as it appears in A. You can see what could be the afterstroke or the Nachschlag, the last two notes of the glancing brace, written out. One can see in the third example here that instead of understanding it as a repeated sequence of one note with a shake followed by 3 16th notes, one can understand it as 3 glancing braces, each followed by an upward leaping third. That will influence your performance of the passage, how you recognize it, structure it, how you phrase it, as opposed to just playing notes. Not seeing the wood for the trees is a saying that fits to this. Lilliput's roll of honour, because they only deal in notes, never see the wood for the trees. It can be heard in their interpretations or their lack thereof. Look at all the notes for them to trip up on. They can get to the end and say, "Yay, I didn't trip. I'm your champion because I didn't trip." In the example 1, if one examines it, one is not going to find mistakes in the harmony. So this manner of performing the glancing brace in that situation in moderately fast pieces is good according to Bach. In 2, you can see that the D in the right hand, and that's in the second beat, the bar, and it looks like an F, that is struck after the G in the left hand, which looks like a B and comes in on the second beat, creates a consecutive or parallel fifth with the right hand E, which looks like a G, that is struck with the left hand A, that looks like a C. Yeah, so you can see the D in the right hand that is struck after the G in the left hand creates a consecutive or parallel fifth with the right hand E that is struck with the left hand A. There it would be a mistake to perform the Prall and the Doppelschlag in this way because it creates consecutive fifths which cause bad singing or a poor melody. And there you can see, like, from that, I mean, you might already know that, but, you know, even though the D, even though it's not struck at the same time as the G in the left hand, still creates the consecutive fifth with the A and E that come after it. Notice how Bach leaves it to us to spot the mistake. This is what he wants from those he's speaking to, for whom music is a goal. This is what he nurtured in his students, that they think for themselves. He wants their engagement. He wants them to realize. Realizing is like opening one's eyes to the truth, to how things are. Then Bach says example 3 is a half cadence. And 3 could be in D minor and an interrupted cadence. So the chord of 5 going to the chord of 6, which is B flat major in D minor. And Bach says example 4 is a full cadence. And that would be a perfect cadence. The chord of 5 to going to the chord of 1, again in D minor. One can notice too that in that, what Bach calls a full cadence, that the top line, the main note, ends as well on a D. So, Bach says this way of executing the glancing brace occurs at half and full cadences. This information can be an extra checkpoint if, in a piece, you've got a suspicion that this execution is called for. You can look to see if it is occurring at a half or full cadence, and if it is, it's one more tick for the pro list, as would be the lack of harmonic mistakes. Very often, if you want to be original in your playing, in your interpretations, getting the correct answer is one of the most original, nowadays is one of the most original things you can do. And when you play it correctly, what's going to happen is you're going to hear, you know, all round, it's a mistake, you're doing it wrong. So it's very good to have a pro list that you can back it up, because you're going to have to back it up, because, you know, you'll be talking to people in the cage who know nothing, because nothing exists in the cage. So the pro and con list, aside from making sure you know that you yourself are satisfied with your answer, which is, you know, very important, you can also back it up. And you'll find that when you have, you know, 10 things to say why you're doing it the way you're doing it, you'll find the person screaming mistake has, when it really comes down to it, then, if not one, then nothing to say why it's a mistake, except No, that's not the way everybody else is doing it. Yeah. One could look at the trill sign in bar 8 of the first movement of Mozart's Sonata in F major K332 and wonder, is that such an example of what Bach is talking about here? He says it is somewhat easy, instead of the sign of the ornament, to rather write out the execution of A, if one wants to have it. You can see Mozart wrote out the execution of A, just with a different tailing. Maybe Mozart wanted to have it. You won't have heard this or have had this pointed out to you by anyone from the Roll of Honour. And there's lots of stuff in Bach, in Mozart and Beethoven's music. It's like, like a sort of inside joke or inside reference, where there's a direct correlation between what Bach talks about and what appears in their music. And so it adds something to the experience of looking at a Mozart score or a Beethoven score when you know what's in this book. It's not a bad thing, I'll tell you. Okay. Wenn in langsamer Zeitmasse 3 Noten heruntersteigen, so entsteht vor der mittelsten ein Vorschlag, worauf über solcher der prallende Doppelschlag eintritt, welchen ein abermaliger Vorschlag vor der letzten Note nachfolget. Dieser Fall ist bei Figur 66 einfach A, mit seinen Zieraten B und mit seiner Ausführung C abgebildet. Der erste Vorschlag ist etwas Gewöhnliches bei langsamen Noten, indem sie gut ausfüllt. Außerdem aber war hier nötig, den prallenden Doppelschlag bequem und nicht eher anzubringen, als bis die Hälfte der Note, worüber sich befindet, vorbei war, welche Hälfte just ausfüllt. Der letzte Vorschlag dient nicht nur zur Verkürzung der letzten langen Note, damit sie wegen ihrer Dauer ein Verhältnis mit der vorigen bekomme, sondern ist auch nötig wegen der Natur des Doppelschlages, welcher, wie der ihm ähnliche Triller mit dem Nachschlage, sich gerne in die Höhe neigt. Man darf diesen letzten Vorschlag nicht von seiner Note abreißen. 1, weil es ein Vorschlag und kein Nachschlag sein soll. 2, weil noch der gegebene Erklärung von den Doppelschlägen die letzte Note derselben niemals mit der folgenden sogleich verbunden werden darf und allezeit ein kleiner Zeitraum übrig bleiben muss, damit, widrigenfalls, kein Triller mit der dritten verwerflichen, nachschlagenden Note daraus entstehe. 3. Die proportionierte Geltung der letzten Note beizubehalten. Wir sehen hier abermal, was das Abreißen der Vorschläge von ihrer Note für Schaden tun kann. Dieses leichter zu verhüten, macht man den prallenden Doppelschlag nach der Regel so scharf als möglich, damit das C wie ein simples Sechzehnteil zu klingen scheine. Hierdurch wird der folgende Vorschlag hinlänglich von dieser Manier abgesondert. Ungeachtet die abgebildete Ausführung dieser Passage ziemlich bunt aussieht und noch fürchterlich erscheinen könnte, wenn sie so, wie sie simpel bei dem Adagio oft vorzukommen pflegt, nämlich mit noch einmal so geschwinden Noten, ausgeschrieben würde, so berührt doch die ganze Kunst der geschickten Ausführung auf die Fertigkeit, einen rechten, scharfen Pralltriller zu machen. Und die Ausnahme muss alsdann ganz natürlich und leichte ausfallen. Bei D ist das Exempel etwas verändert. Es behält aber dennoch dieselbe Ausführung bei den letzten zwei Noten. First off, look at the detail with which Bach goes into the short passage depicted at figure 66. He has 11 points to make about it. If I'm not too strict in my counting of them, I'd say I could even count 13 or 14. More if I was as well to count what he said in the previous two paragraphs. And Lilliput's roll of honour really wants to tell me that Bach forgot, or was too careless in 1753 to write in the bow in the execution part of figure 66 that would tie the first note of the glancing brace to the appoggiatura. This is just to show the ridiculous level at which your champions operate, if I haven't already established that. I'll keep on establishing it. It won't stop. I'll know I'll have sufficiently established that when they're on their hands and knees begging me to stop establishing it. So this was important enough for Bach to give it its own paragraph, none of which in his open letter he says are superfluous. He says this happens in a slow tempo when 3 notes descend. Maybe it does, and maybe when everyone else plays such a passage from a slow piece as is presented in its default setting in figure 66A, as 66A is written, you'll be playing it as Bach says it's played, like in B and C, and it might transform the movement. It might be the missing piece of the jigsaw. I don't know, And, at the least you can keep it in mind with the thought of, varying a repeat. Whenever I thought of something Bach said as being no longer relevant, I have always been proved wrong. And it was always a case of me underestimating Bach, the relevance of what he said, and the importance of what he said, while overestimating myself and the standard of today's roll of honour. We get a taste of Bach's analytical powers here, his powers of appraisal. You can imagine some of the things he might go into were you to have a lesson with him, or the things he might consider while composing. One can see how deep and broad his understanding of such a short passage is. I have no doubt that he could and would go deeper still into this passage, were he addressing all aspects of music and not restricting himself to certain areas. I mean, I say I have no doubt, but yeah, it's basically a no-brainer that he could. But, you know, he knows, he had an idea of like sound production, you know, like all aspects. It's like he was a sound engineer, a composer, you know. I mean, he makes the Roll of Honor look really like they've got egg on their face. So when a Roll of Honor representative gives you all the pro-practice gymnastic strategies of the cage, and then when it comes to interpretation, tells you that you could perhaps play it with a crescendo or a diminuendo, whatever you prefer, you can see how lacking that is. So the first appoggiatura not only fills out the long note, but it prevents us from bringing in the glancing brace too early. This can be connected to what Bach addressed in his appendix to paragraph 24 from the chapter on the brace, when he said, Außerdem könnte mancher Ungeübter mit dieser Manier zeitig zu platzen und wäre alsdann genötigt, nicht zu viel Zeit leer zu lassen, sie, wieder die im 10. Paragraph gegebenen Regel, zu langsam vorzutragen, welches eine schlechte Ausnahme verursacht. So, außerdem könnte mancher Ungeübter mit dieser Manier zu zeitig zu platzen und wäre alsdann genötigt, nicht zu viel Zeit leer zu lassen, sie, wieder die im 10. Paragraph gegebene Regel, zu langsam vorzutragen, welches eine schlechte Ausnahme verursacht. Notice the use of the word Ausnahme. Bach does not mean exception. And the paragraph 10 Bach mentions there says, and one could also connect the second half of this paragraph 10 to that what he's saying about adding the first appoggiatura to fill out the long middle note in figure 66. Da dieser Doppelschlag die allermeiste Zeit geschwinde gemacht und die oberste Note nach der schon angeführten Art geschnellt wird, so begeht man einen Fehler, wenn man bei einer langen Note statt des ordentlichen Trillers den Doppelschlag gebraucht, weil diese Note, welche durch den Triller ausgefüllt werden sollte, hierdurch zu leer bleibt. The first appoggiatura in figure 66 solves the problem of the C being too empty, were the glancing brace to be used alone. And Bach saying the glancing brace fills exactly half of the note can be an extra clue as to when to use it. Yeah. So it can be an extra clue as when to use it. When it fills out half the note, it can be a clue of the tempo Bach is thinking of. And it can be a clue to how long the note is. Connecting what Bach says gives us a bigger picture. We have better context, like as in, why would we not want to bring in the glancing brace too early? So we know what's around the stuff he says from what he said before. Both extracts could be considered when looking at the appoggiatura in bar 48 of the second movement of K457. So that's the sonata in C minor by Mozart. One could wonder if the D is to fill out the note to prevent us from bringing in the brace too early. One can hear the bad performance that results in the absence of that in any and every recording from the Roll of Honor. And don't believe me? Check it out.
The example 2 from the appendix to paragraph 28. If one was to perform the glancing brace over the E as it is ordinarily played to avoid the consecutive fifths, one might notice that, in keeping with paragraph 10, the glancing brace doesn't sufficiently fill out the E, and the E remains too empty. And that E, through the process of elimination, might be an example of a note that should be filled out with a regular trill. So it's just, ways to consider the examples and together with what Bach is saying. And the last appoggiatura of figure 66, according to Bach, is not just to shorten the last note so it stands in relation to the previous note regarding its length. It is also there to satisfy the nature of the brace, or a trill with an afterstroke, in that they want to ascend. They gladly or readily or happily ascend. There's a lot of insight there. I could go off on a huge tangent. Instead, I'll look at Bärenreiter, the roll of honour. They get their notation of 66C wrong. The bow is meant to extend to the B and not the D. And comparing that mistake to what Bach says in the text, one can see what a ridiculous mistake it is to make, especially since they're the people who put themselves in a position above Bach where they felt they could pass judgment on him, saying in their introduction how he could be justifiably proud that the text as well as the notation in both his essays were practically faultless. Are they really in a position to be able to judge that? That's a rhetorical question. With the mistake Bärenreiter made, and don't forget, this comes hot on the heels of the mistake they made with figure 65 with the asterisks in the last paragraph. So with the mistake they made, with the bow they added, Bärenreiter are encouraging the separation of the last appoggiatura from its note
and the joining of it to the previous note, while Bach is talking at length about why that shouldn't be done. He says we again see the damage here that can be done by ripping an appoggiatura from its note. But Bärenreiter doesn't see it. When Bärenreiter said that they only noticed one spot that is problematic with regard to its content, we can see that while they think they are talking about Bach, they are in fact talking about themselves. They are making a confession and an admittance of just how little they notice. And I think I've adequately shown that whatever they thought they noticed, that one spot, that on top of everything else, that was wrong, an incorrect observation. I think this is a reasonably decent example of how, regardless of what we may think we are doing, like with the power the like button bestows upon us, in YouTube or social media or whatever, it will always be us who are judged when faced with the truth or the correct answer. By default, that's not... In the face of the correct answer, the tables will always be ultimately turned back on us and on how we behaved. We might think, I think I've mentioned it before, we might think of, Copernicus and Galileo, and and everybody was judging them at the time. And now, when it's looked back on, the people who judged Copernicus are now the ones being judged. And that's what the truth does. It turns it around. It puts the truth goes out of question, or the correct answer. And it's how people behaved in the face of the correct answer. And it's not because a person is that person or the other person. It all depends on how they behave. And when it's seen, the correct answer, that Bach didn't get it wrong, it now becomes about Bärenreiter and not about Bach anymore. He's out of the picture. And they expose themselves. Bärenreiter are just exposing themselves and the standard they're at. And what damage can ripping an appoggiatura away from or off its following note do? Bach says we can see again. What did we see again? So the damage is, it creates the trill with the objectionable extra note added to its afterstroke. You can see such a trill on the screen. That's figure 33, to which Bach says in paragraph 21 from the chapter on trills, Wenn man dem letzten, so der Nachschlag, noch ein nötigen beifügt, and that's figure 33, welches man mit Recht unter die verwerflichen Nachschläge rechnen kann, so begeht man ebenso hässliche als gewöhnliche Fehler. I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised if one was to find an example of Lilliput's roll of honour recommending such a practice to perform that passage, telling a student to add the last appoggiatura to the turn at the end of the glancing brace. They wouldn't call it a glancing brace. They'd call it a trill, probably. It is uncanny how what Bach says is reflected in the roll of honour, even though there are so many reasons why the roll of honour nowadays should not be making the same exact mistakes as the roll of honour then a days. Practices that aren't done and all, but it's amazing how Bach nails it. It's quite uncanny. Bar 47 of the prelude from the English Suite, number 6 in D minor. So Bach's English Suite in D minor, number 6, J.S. Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach's. In bar 47 of that, I'll just mention that again. You can see there's the trill on a G, and the Nachschlag is written out for that, and it has that extra note. So that might be interesting if you're looking at it for some backstory, or it can keep you, wondering. You'll definitely notice that spot and have some background to add to it. As well, in bar 4 of Beethoven's Sonata Opus 110 in A flat major, I think, one can see the extra note added to the afterstroke of the trill, and the trill is on a D flat. And I could imagine Beethoven had Bach in mind when he composed that, and that he was looking for its sits, or the location in the world of music where it works. That's another case of all these kind of inside references that you can see in the scores of Beethoven and Mozart, and there I'll bet Beethoven had Bach in mind. And Beethoven liked finding locations in the world of music. You can see that in many of his pieces. And when you find it in the world of music, it'll work. And there he was finding a spot where that extra, objectionable note added to the afterstroke works. He was finding the continuation that sort of redeems that. So that's another one to think about, or to connect to that extra, note added to the afterstroke. So it creates the trill with the objectionable extra note added to its afterstroke, and it undermines the proper performance of the brace. That was the next thing. I'll just say with the D minor, the English Suite number 6 in D minor, one could wonder, was that a point of contention between Johann Sebastian Bach and his son, where they disagreed, or could it be an indication that extra note added to the Nachschlag is maybe not correct, or taken down wrong or something, and that there was no disagreement between Johann Sebastian Bach and his son? There's things to think about there. Yeah, so it creates the trill with the objectionable extra note added to its afterstroke, and it undermines the proper performance of the brace. And with that, Bach said, according to the given explanation of the braces. So here is that explanation from paragraph 20 from the chapter on the brace. Ungeachtet der Ähnlichkeit des Doppelschlages mit dem Triller, unterscheidet sich doch der erstere von dem letzteren durch zwei Stücke. Erstlich dadurch, indem seine letzten Noten nicht geschwinde mit der folgenden verbindet, weil die ersten geschwinder sind als die letzte, und also vor der folgenden Note allezeit ein kleiner Zeitraum überbleiben muss. So that is undermined when one rips the last appoggiatura from its note. I just read in the introduction to the edition of the English Suites brought out by the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music that appoggiaturas are, more often than not, short and, like slides, sometimes anticipate the beat. A Lilliput fabrication, every bit of it, postulates of the cage, promoting mistakes on those they force them on that are as ugly as they are common. You're champions. They did it again. If the appoggiatura anticipates the beat, it's being ripped away from its following note. And what does that do? It causes damage, according to Bach. So that's the associated board of the Royal Schools of Music forcing their fabrications on the students. Paragraph 23 from the chapter on ornaments in general, Bach says, Alle durch kleinen Nötchen angedeutete Manieren gehören zur folgenden Note. Folglich darf niemals der vorhergehenden etwas von ihrer Geltung abgebrochen werden, indem bloß die folgende so viel verliert, als die kleinen Nötchen betragen. And then in the paragraph 24 he goes on to talk about that. And he says, Man schleift durch sie in die folgende Note hinein. Hier wieder wird gar sehr oft gefehlt, indem man auf eine raue Art in die Hauptnote hineinplumpt, nachdem noch voll gar dazu die mit den kleinen Noten vergesellschaftete Manieren ungeschickt an und herausgebracht worden sind. Slides belong to those ornaments indicated by small notes. The Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music also endorse the doctored version of the prowl trill while mentioning Frederick Neumann and talking about main note shakes are here often advocated in cases of legato. So what they'll do in a case of legato, because they don't know what a legato is. They have no idea what legato is. So they'll indicate, like advocate that the trill should begin on the note itself and not on the note above. And they as well have suggested in the cases of prowl trills, the prowl trill with the first note tied to the previous note. And in England and in Ireland, the Associated Board have the monopoly. They're Lilliput, roll of honour. They're the ones keeping in the cage. I did all my grade exams with the Associated Board. That's why I had that edition, because I had to buy it for one of the grades that I did. So they have a monopoly on the music education, and its fabrications. It's wrong. It's recommending exactly that. What Bach says leads to mistakes that are as common as they are ugly. Of course they're common and ugly. Of course they're common when the Associated Board are recommending to every kid learning the piano. And you can put them, the Associated Board, with Bernreiter, with all of them. I'll take them all down because they're all midgets. So that's another damage that it does. Plus, it destroys the proportioned value of the last note. The proportional value of the last note should match that of the middle note, i.e. half its value should be filled out. Otherwise, it is disproportionately long to the preceding note that had half of its value filled, i.e. the balance is thrown. One could connect this information to one's assessment of figure 58x if one is wondering, should the appoggiatura in that example, which is a C, be long or short? It's another angle at which to approach the question, and it could potentially provide an extra inclusion to the pro and con list. It's a good way to make a final decision. You see which instance has the most pros and the least cons. And finally, ripping an appoggiatura from its following note kills its appoggiatura quality or characteristics. it turns a Vorschlag into a Nachschlag. So it turns an appoggiatura into an afterstroke. And that's why I'm not entirely happy with the term appoggiatura. I'd rather a different term, because it doesn't cover, what do we say in English for a Nachschlag? It's such an important part of music, at least for Bach it is. I could sum up why an appoggiatura is written small. You know, if you're looking for an alternative answer to that question of why it's written small, if you're loath to answer it with the "so people like you and me don't ornament it" drivel. I don't claim this to be definitive, but one could say an appoggiatura is written small so that one knows to play it short when one can't fulfill the necessary or required characteristics of a long appoggiatura. So, you know, if you're a teacher and you're teaching students and you want to give a good answer, that is a better answer than Lilliput's Roll of Honour will provide. And Lilliput's Roll of Honour, they decide whether an appoggiatura is long or short, and they just play a note. Of course, it doesn't matter if you play an appoggiatura long or short. Play them as you like in the cage, because nothing you do in the cage is of relevance. All you're doing is playing notes. They have no clue, and that's why, you know, with Rondo alla Turca, everybody plays it wrong. Even the people who are so-called presenting themselves as experts, they haven't got a clue what an appoggiatura actually is. So you could say that an appoggiatura is written small so that one knows to play it short when one can't fulfill the necessary or required characteristics of a long appoggiatura. And that, I think, like from my own experience, that will be mainly the deciding factor. Should this appoggiatura be long or short? Well, am I able to play a long appoggiatura? Does the speed of the piece, the length of the note allow a long appoggiatura? Because that's an event. And if I can't provide the necessary elements to go with that event, well, then I can't play a long appoggiatura. I have to play it short. Because if I play what I think is a long appoggiatura and I can't fulfill any of them, all I'm doing is playing a note and nothing else. I'm not playing an appoggiatura at all. And I've established, like on other levels, why it's complete nonsense to say it's written small so nobody ornaments it. Because that doesn't stop somebody from ornamenting it. Or it didn't then. As Bach demonstrates in this book. So, what Bach pointed out in this paragraph 29 is a good bit of the damage tearing an appoggiatura from its following note can do. Bach then says how one can easily safeguard from this by executing the glancing brace as sharp as possible, so the C, its last C, seems to sound like a simple 16th note. This can be connected to what he said regarding the performance at the Pral trill in paragraph 32 from the chapter on trills. Dieser Triller kann daher ebenso wohl wie die kurzen Vorschläge über einer geschwinden Note vorkommen, welche demungeachtet nicht verhindern darf, dass dieser Triller deswegen doch so hurtig gemacht werden muss, dass man glauben sollte, die Note, worüber angebracht wird, verliere nicht das geringste hierdurch an ihrer Geltung, sondern treffe auf einen Punkt zur rechten Zeit ein. This is the opposite to what Edition Schott is saying about the glancing brace. Edition Schott says in the edition 2 of their appendix, their explanations to the pieces that go with the book that they published. They say about the glancing brace, referring to the glancing brace, die Anbindung der ersten Note bedeutet so viel wie ein kleines, selbstständiges Ritardando der rechten Hand, während der Bass seine Note punktlich erzählt sei, also ein wenig vor der rechten Hand bringt. The tying of the first note means so much as a small independent ritardando of the right hand, while the bass brings its note punctually to the time of counting, i.e. a little before the right hand. While Addition Shot talks about a ritardando, Bach talks about performing the glancing brace as sharp as possible, creating the illusion that the C is arriving on the spot at the right time, or rather that it is a simple 16th note, the opposite of a ritardando. If the tying of the first note means so much as a small independent ritardando of the right hand, as Addition Shot says, then Bach, as can be seen from the text, does not want that first note tied, because he wants the opposite of a ritardando with the right hand. He wants it to sound, he wants it to be so sharp that it sounds like that C is kind of just a simple note that's not ornamented. And for it to sound like a simple 16th note, it has to come earlier. That quite the opposite of being a ritardando. It has to be very fast and very quick, wasting no time at all. The rest of the ornament. So that can be added to the list of arguments as to why the doctor text regarding the Pral trill is wrong and why it's a scam. And I'm sure you're sure that your champions would be able to come up with just as many, if not even more arguments as to why they are correct in worshipping the doctored version and why it's me that's wrong. Only it'd be nice if Lilliput were to demand that from their champions. Edition shot are disobeying the first commandment. They claim the false God of which they preach to be the one true God. And they are forcing their fabrications on us, just like the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music. Most of what exists in the cage, and in the cage nothing exists but fabrications. So most of them are the opposite, the mirror image of what they are in the world of music. Because the roll of honour are looking at music through the bars of the cage, prevented from occupying its world by those bars. So music's right becomes their left. And they are talking to us like the devil would talk to us, pretending to be our friend. The sort of talk to which people can and do develop an addiction. That's what people respond to, this pandering. And everything to say, like when Edition Shot talks about a retardando, the right answer is exactly the opposite of that. And you'll find, or I've found, that most things are exactly the opposite of what they should be. Finally, Bach tells us how we can avoid losing sight of the wood for the trees. He prompts us to make the connection to that paragraph 32 from the chapter on trills that I just read out. The rule for speed might be the same as that for special effects in the movie business. That when they are done well or done right, no one even sees that they are there. And I'll point out Bach's use of the word Kunst in that sentence. Kunst means art. When Bach wants to say art, he uses the word Kunst. When he wants to say way, like in the title of his book, he uses the word art. The art of playing keyboard instruments is an incorrect translation of the title of his book. My translation is the best you'll find. And what one could do, just as an idea, is get a fool's cap, maybe one with a hardback, and write in the translation into it as I go through the paragraphs, so you have your own version to consult. I've seen that in Dublin, like in Eason's, you'll see fool's cap with a hard cover, and they're nice. Generally it's a nice idea, but like I find the question always is, what do you write in it? And this would be something, you can write in. You can write in the paragraphs, and then you could maybe, print out or photocopy or something the musical examples, and then cut them out and glue them on the page, and then you have your own. You have your own version to consult and to look up the different paragraphs or whatever. And it'll be a good translation that you have there. The best, better than, the Mitchell ones who, it doesn't seem so after the good translation. Bach means performance when he says Ausnahme. He means performance when he says in paragraph 30 from the chapter on trills, Wir finden all da auch seine Ausnahme vorgestellt. He is talking about the thing itself and not an exception. The roll of honour might say he doesn't talk about the thing itself, but rather the exception, because he takes it that everybody already knows the non-exception. That'll be their answer to get out of it, to avoid needing to provide answers or consistency or anything like that. They'll say, it's an exception and there's the non-exception. Why does he not mention the non-exception then for anybody who's frustrated with this kind of, disingenuous talk? They'll go, because it would be taken for granted that everybody knows the non-exception, so he wouldn't bother mentioning it. And if you've seen the video, the last one with the Praltrill scam and read his open letter, you'll see his feelings towards learning things properly. Yeah, and so in paragraph 27 from the chapter on trills, we can see that Bach is not in the habit of leaving things out because he assumes it to be already known. Ein mittelmäßig Ohr wird allezeit empfinden, wo der Nachschlag gemacht werden kann oder nicht. Ich habe dieses wenige bloß Anfängern zu gefallen und, weil es hierher gehört, anführen müssen. Lastly, Bach shows us how the passage can be varied, which gives us a better chance of spotting it in the score. What Bach is doing here is, again, helping us think outside the box. Yeah, so there's a lot of information there, a lot of insight. And you know, you're hearing it here. I'm setting the record straight. And it's worth setting straight. It's worth it for the future of classical music. Not just, you know, in terms of performing the old stuff, but with a proper, if the fabrications were gotten rid of and the record was set straight, we could see a move into the future and into the development of classical music, of composition. I think it's gone down a cul-de-sac. It's hit a dead end. Schoenberg, he exists. He lived and died in the cage, and nothing exists in his music at all. Nothing. It's only notes, and he removed every bit of wisdom, every bit of insight, and he created the dumbest system. A system designed for the cage. And I know he's not the only modern composer, but everybody is ending up with the same disadvantage. I mean, you can't go on from Beethoven without knowing what Beethoven knew. And nobody knows what Beethoven knows because it's non-existent. The correct information is non-existent. And there's a chance here to get the correct information. There's a chance here to enter the world of music and then explore the world of music and find new locations in that world. But you know, the people in power, the Associated Board, they will never recommend my channel. They will never recommend me. They'll hope that I just disappear. They won't like for what I am showing here to become part of a bigger conversation. They won't want that. And that's the thing. It's all, you know, when one is dealing with the truth or the correct answer, it's always up. You know, those in power, the truth never has a hope with those in power. It only has a hope with the power of the people. That is where the truth can find its way. Can come out. it'll never come out. Those in the Associated Board, in Bernreiter, in Juilliard, all these things, the Sokolov, Kissin, all these people, they're not going to acknowledge me or say, yeah, you know, oops, we're definitely getting it wrong and we can definitely learn from this guy. They'll never do that. Because they have stuff to lose. As long as, you know, they fool the public, they don't care about the truth. So it's up to the public to care about it and to say, yeah, we want that. We want the truth. And I guarantee you the truth is going to, you know, the cliche sets you free, but it does. It takes you out of the cage. And you will, you know, you'll imagine if everybody was able to fish for a lifetime. Imagine the independence, how much power is lost by empowering people that much. Imagine how much power will be lost when people, when I'm finished with them, won't feel like they'll need another lesson for the rest of their lives. Nobody who's on the receiving end of all that cash that's generated out of, you know, inadequate education is going to want to see an end to that inadequate education. No one. So you can't rely or wait for them to endorse this, or, you know, it's not going to happen. They don't want any of this to come out because it puts them in the worst light possible, and it'll continue to do so because, but that's their own fault. They are alone, they are themselves responsible for it. Yeah, so that's it. And I'll continue with more. They want these paragraphs were intense, or there was a lot there, and a lot of, you know, all that, those fabrications to deal with from Lilliput's Roll of Honor. The next ones are, hopefully they'll be a bit more straightforward, and I can, you know, maybe leave out the Roll of Honor a bit, at least for the next few, and I'll just you know, I'll only have to deal with, you know, what Bach is sharing. And yeah, I might be bad at stressing how good the Bach stuff is for all the other stuff, but there's been some great stuff in these two paragraphs, you know, really, really useful stuff, and I hope that's not lost. But it's there, it's said, it's there for the taking. You just have to take it and use it. And I guarantee, when you start discovering this, what I'm sharing, what's there to be gotten, you're gonna be, you know, you'll have 99 problems, but the piano won't be one of them. I mean, your playing won't be one of them. And that's a pretty nice position to be in. So, thanks for watching. Bye.